You know his name. Everyone does, but nobody knows who he actually was. The most famous writer in human history vanished completely for 7 years, and when he came back, he somehow knew things that should have been impossible for him to know. This is the story of William Shakespeare, and the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. In February 1585, a young man in the small English town of Stratford-upon-Avon watched his twins get baptized. Their names were Hannah and Judith. Shakespeare was 21 years old. He had a wife, 3 children, no money, no education beyond a small local school, no connections to the world outside his provincial hometown. Then he disappeared. Not died, not moved somewhere recorded, not left any letter or document or trail. He simply vanished from every historical record on Earth for 7 years. Historians call this period the Lost Years. And after centuries of research, not one scholar has produced a single verified document proving where Shakespeare was or what he was doing between 1585 and 1592. Biographer Anthony Holden, who spent years studying this gap, concluded that the silence is not a coincidence. Records existed for ordinary people in Elizabethan England: births, deaths, court appearances, tax records, parish notes. Shakespeare left none. For 7 years, it is as if he did not exist. But here's where it gets strange. When Shakespeare reappeared in 1592, he was already famous. A dying playwright named Robert Greene attacked him in a published pamphlet, calling him an upstart crow who had stolen the thunder of established London writers. You do not get attacked like that unless you are already a serious threat. Shakespeare had not just survived those 7 years. He had somehow transformed himself into one of the most talked-about creative forces in London in 7 years, starting from nothing. So what happened during those lost years? Scholars have proposed 4 main theories. The first is that he fled Stratford after being accused of poaching deer from the estate of a powerful local landowner named Sir Thomas Lucy. Some historical accounts suggest Shakespeare even wrote a mocking song about Lucy to humiliate him publicly. If true, leaving town quickly would have been a matter of survival. The second theory, supported by historian Anthony Holden, is that Shakespeare traveled to Lancashire in northern England and worked secretly among Catholic communities under a false name. A will from 1581 references a young man called William Shakeshaft living in Lancashire, a name remarkably similar to Shakespeare. Nobody has proven this connection. Nobody has disproven it either. The third theory is that he traveled to Italy. This is the one that haunts scholars the most. Shakespeare set more than 20 of his plays outside England: Romeo and Juliet in Italy, Othello in Venice, The Merchant of Venice, Much Ado About Nothing. Plays filled with specific, accurate details about Italian cities, Italian customs, Italian legal systems, and Italian social behavior that historians have struggled to explain. Researcher Elwyn Edwards spent years documenting how Shakespeare's Italian plays referenced sources that had never been translated into English. The Comedy of Errors was based on a Latin play that had no English translation until 1595, 3 years after Shakespeare was already producing it. Twelfth Night closely mirrors an Italian play that was essentially unknown in England at the time. The only logical explanation, Edwards argued, was that Shakespeare had seen these works performed in Italy itself. Nobody knows for certain. But the evidence refuses to disappear. Nobody talks about what this means for the bigger question, because the lost years connect directly to the deepest mystery of all. How did a man with no university education, no aristocratic connections, and no confirmed travel outside England write plays, demonstrating expert knowledge of law, medicine, royal court politics, Italian geography, Latin literature, and European history? Historian Glyn Perry has argued that Shakespeare's father's legal troubles during William's childhood likely shaped his understanding of power and class. That explains some of the psychological depth in the plays, but it does not explain the technical knowledge. It does not explain the Latin. It does not explain Italy. This is where the authorship question enters. Some of the most serious Shakespeare scholars in history have suggested that the name William Shakespeare may have been a mask. Not a fraud exactly, but a front. A name attached to work produced by someone or a group of people who could not publish under their own names. The candidates proposed over the centuries include Francis Bacon, a philosopher and lawyer with encyclopedic knowledge; Christopher Marlowe, a playwright and known spy who officially died in 1593, but whose death was suspicious and poorly documented; and Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, an aristocrat with deep knowledge of the Italian cities that appear so precisely in the plays. Writer Bill Bryson, who examined the Shakespeare authorship debate carefully, concluded that the honest answer is simply this: we do not know enough about the man to say with certainty that he wrote everything attributed to him. That is not a fringe position. That is the conclusion of one of the most rigorous popular historians of the last century. And yet here is what makes this story remarkable. Whether Shakespeare wrote every word himself, collaborated with others, or served as the public face of a hidden genius, something extraordinary happened. A body of work emerged from Elizabethan England that has shaped every major language on earth. over 1,700 words you use today, were first recorded in Shakespeare's plays. Bedroom, generous, lonely, obscene, countless others. The emotional architecture of how humans tell stories in films and novels and the scripts of every documentary you have ever watched traces back to structures Shakespeare either invented or perfected. The man who vanished for 7 years left a mark on human civilization that has never faded. So here's the question worth sitting with. Does it matter who he really was? You know his name. Everyone does. But after 400 years of searching, nobody knows the man behind it. And maybe that is exactly how he planned it. The greatest writer who ever lived may also be history's greatest mystery.